I did mention there were like 76 slides, right? Yeah, so I'm going to cruise as quick as I can here. All right, third part, part 3. Typical rights of preferred shareholders. They might have the right of conversion or redemption privilege, meaning that they can turn around and say, okay, I have the right to turn this 1 share of preferred stock into 20 shares of common stock. And they could have, that could be one of the rights that they have. Why would you do that? Well, maybe you don't care so much about dividends, and maybe common shares of stock are at a great price right now, so you want to buy them. So that would be built into it. Preferred shares may be cumulative or non-cumulative. The idea here, if it's cumulative, I said preferred shareholders typically have some sort of built-in dividend to them. If it's cumulative, it means if the company, let's say, didn't have the money to pay preferred dividends this year, but then they have the money in year 2, then what they would do is the debt would accumulate, meaning that in year 2, when they do have the cash to pay out dividends, they would then have to pay year 1s and year 2s. All right, so that's cumulative. Non-cumulative, if they didn't have the money to pay in year 1, but they do have the money to pay in year 2, well, they only owe for year 2 because it's not cumulative. Too bad that they didn't pay you in year 1. All right, so that's the difference there. We're going to go into a problem with that, if I remember correctly, in a second. Participating versus non-participating. Sometimes preferred shareholders can get money beyond what they're, I hate to say guaranteed, but basically beyond what they're promised, if you will. If they're guaranteed a certain amount, I roll my eyes at the word, if they're guaranteed a certain amount, anything beyond that amount, sometimes they can participate in. So maybe the company had a banner year and they're just sharing their money with everybody. They may get beyond what they've been promised. Okay. All right. Is it equity or is it debt? Well, because remember I'm saying it's somewhat guaranteed that that preferred shareholders get dividends, so doesn't it really qualify as debt, meaning that since it's a liability? Well, it's kind of one of those in-between wishy-washy things. It's considered equity, but if they have something called mandatorily redeemable preferred shares, it has to be reported in the balance sheet as a liability. So the idea is if, no matter what, if the company, let's see, wait, hang on a second. Okay, I had to refresh my memory because this one is not one that I've ever come across in real life. But it exists, so we'll talk about it. Mandatorily redeemable preferred shares. The idea is that if the company is required to buy the shares back at some point, maybe 5 years from now they're required to repurchase the shares of stock and give the money back, well then that's more like, it almost sounds like a bond, right? You're paying interest, but really you're paying dividends. But at the end of it, you absolutely have to give the money back to the shareholders. So if that's the case, then it's considered debt. Again, kind of an odd one. All right, let's talk about par value. Par value, let's just keep it simple, is an antiquated concept that unfortunately it continues, but it really doesn't mean anything. It does mean something for our accounting because it does exist and we have to work within what we have. I mean, some of these companies have been around for 100 years and they've had something called par value. But the idea is that a share of stock will very often have a par value, whether it's $1 or 50 cents or $5. It's some small, 5 is actually even a little high, some small inconsequential amount that is stated on the share of stock. So maybe my par value, my share of stock would be $1, but I'm really going to turn around and sell it in the market for about 50. It means nothing now. It came into play many moons ago because the idea is that people are buying shares of stock and they're like, well, what is this? Is it worthless? Is it actually worth something? Well, it was kind of like, well, it's really worth at least $1. All right, so we're not going to spend any real time on that. Dividends and arrears. Okay, we'll do this real quick. The shareholders' equity of FSU Industries, too far. FSU Industries includes $200,000 of $1 par common stock and $400,000 par value of 6% cumulative preferred stock. The Board of Directors declared cash dividends, $50,000 in 2021, $20,000 in 2020, and $40,000 in 2019. All right. So the idea is this is part of that whole split. How, preferred shareholders get their money first. It is cumulative, so you're going to owe the money if there's a year that you can't pay it for whatever reason. So you're going to take the $400,000 times 6%, right? And that's going to be $24,000. Calculators. All right, $24,000. So the idea is that these preferred shareholders should get $24,000 no matter what. All right, I don't have any way to show you guys to write numbers on here, unfortunately. All right, so $24,000 is what the preferred shareholders get every year. In 2019, they paid out $40,000. Okay, so we're fine. They got their $40,000. That means, hang on. Okay, 2019, $24,000 preferred shareholders got. The common shareholders get whatever is left over. So if it was 40 in total, 24 goes to preferred, 16 goes to common. Okay. In 2020, they only had $20,000 to pay. So if that's the case, they paid the preferred shareholders all $20,000 because they get their money first, and the common shareholders, they have nothing left over. The thing is, though, they're supposed to be paying $24,000, so they really owe them $4,000 at this point. All right, so 2021 comes along and they pay $50,000. Well, so you've got to pay your preferred shareholders the $24,000 for the current year plus the $4,000 that they owed from last year. All right, so that's going to come out to $28,000, and the common shareholders get whatever's left over. Okay, so the answer is B here. They're going to get $22,000. Okay, shares sold for cash. Let's get into some journal entries here. Dow Industrial sells 10 million of its common shares, $1 per par per share for $10 per share. Lots of round numbers here. All right, the cash they're getting is going to be $10 a share for 10 million shares. All right, we're keeping the zeros off. So let's just pretend the millions don't exist. 10 shares at $10 per share, that's $100. That's the cash they're getting. I always like to start with the cash you're getting because that's easy to calculate. Common stock always gets recorded at par as long as there is par. In this case, they tell us there's a $1 par, so 10 million shares at $1 per share, or 10 times 1, is a $10 credit for a common stock. And everything beyond that par value, look at the words, paid in capital, right? That's what this is, in excess of par, anything above par value. So that was $9 a share, right? Because they sold it for $10 a share, par value is 1, so it's $9 a share for 10 million shares, and there's your $90. Okay. If there is no par, which is the way it should always be, and let me move myself. There we go. If there's no par, the entry is simply cash for the money you got and credit to common stock. None of this par value, none of this recording at a par value, none of this paid in capital excess of par stuff. It's just recorded at its full amount. Okay. You can not only sell or use your shares of stock to raise capital in the sense of cash, but you can actually get non-cash items as well. Maybe you want to, you don't have the cash in order to buy a building, and the owner is willing to take shares of stock as a trade-off. Awesome. So I'm going to sell my stock. I'm going to give them shares of stock. You can read through this in a minute. I'm going to give them shares of stock, and I'm going to turn around and record, say, the building or the land or whatever it is I'm purchasing for the shares of stock value. Now, if the land has a certain value, let's say we know the land is worth, $100,000, and my shares of stock are worth, have a $1 par value and are worth, $50,000. I'm going to be recording the rest of it as paid in capital in excess of par. Okay, so hang on, we'll get there in a second. All right. Okay, so what they're telling you here in this slide is, the issuance of shares should be recorded at grant date fair value, so the day that we sell them. So here's an example. It's probably easiest to look at some numbers. Dumont Chemicals, I'm trying to speak too quickly, issues 1 million of its common shares, $1 per share, in exchange for a custom-built factory, for which no cash price is available. But I do know that my shares of stock are currently selling at $10 per share. Since I know that information and it's a publicly traded stock and I have that information available to me, I'm going to record the building at the fair market value of the shares of stock. If I didn't know, because it was a private company, what my value was, then I would go I'd find out whatever the fair value was of the building that I'm buying, or the factory that I'm buying. So it depends on which is the more objective data. In this case, obviously, publicly traded stock is pretty objective. So it was $10 per share, 1 million shares. Here we go. We're going to, instead of recording cash, we got a building. So property, plant, and equipment, recording common stock at par, and credit to paid in capital for everything beyond that. What if we're selling more than one security for one single price? Again, this is kind of an odd one. The idea is that you would split it between which one's value is more known. All right, best way to do this one is with an example too. AP&P issues 4 million of its common shares, $1 per share, and 2 million of its preferred shares, $5 par for $100 million. Today's issue of the Wall Street Journal lists AP&P's common at $10 per share. Okay, so we know that for a fact, that the common share is currently trading at $10 a piece. ones with a $1 par value. Since that is the most objective information we have, we are going to use that. We may not know what the preferred stock is being traded at. So we've got cash, all right, for $100 million. The idea is you're issuing 2 shares of stock for 1 price. So you're getting $100 million here. Common stock, there we go, 4 million shares. We know this. We know it's $1 per share. It's the par value, 4 million shares. And we know that it's trading for $10 a share right now. So beyond par, right, $10 a share, 4 million shares. Wait a second. Okay, sorry. The cumulative amount, $10 a share, 4 million shares, 40 million. About anything beyond the par value is going to be in paid capital. So right here we've got 40 million. That means we're going to assume that the preferred stock is 60 million. All right. We're going to record the par value. It's $5 par, 2 million shares. And everything else is going to go to paid capital in excess of par. Okay. This was the more objective data, so we use this kind of to drive the 2-for-1 sale price here. Okay. Share issue costs. Okay, the only thing we're trying, I'm not going to go through this in detail. What I want to get across to you in this slide, and you can pause it and look at it all you'd like, is if you've got share issue costs, which you probably do. There's a lot of costs that that are involved with issuing shares of stock, right? So if that's the case, and you've got your proceeds are reduced then basically by those costs. So they don't tell you how much the costs are, but in this example, the idea being that you reduce the cash received by what you had to pay in share issue costs, right? The various fees and whatnot you'd have to pay. You'd reduce the cash you received, and then you'd reduce the paid in capital in excess of par by those extra discounts and commissions and so on. Okay? All right. Last thing, I swear. Then we'll go on. Okay. What's this going to look like? Beamer Company issued 50,000 shares of 1 cent per common stock for $230,000. What does that look like? Well, you record the cash for the $230 you got. You record the common stock for $500 because it'd be 1 cent times 50,000 shares, and paid in capital in excess of par gets everything else. Okay. Next video. To be continued.